"Don't you dare touch that child again." The words cut through the first-class cabin like a blade through silk. 30 passengers froze mid-motion, coffee cups suspended, magazines lowered, conversations dying in throats. The woman in seat 2A, designer sunglasses perched in her perfectly highlighted hair, stared at the man in the faded maintenance jacket as if he'd just spoken in tongues. This was Flight 1847, Seattle to San Diego. 6:15 in the morning, and in the next 90 minutes, everyone aboard would learn that the quiet man they'd dismissed as airport staff had written the protocol that would save their lives. But first, someone had to grab his son. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. The aircraft cleaner didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Victor Brennan had spent 15 years commanding crisis rooms where billion-dollar aircraft hung in the balance. His calm was the kind that made people instinctively straighten their spines. He removed the woman's manicured hand from his 8-year-old's wrist with the precision of someone who disarmed more dangerous things than entitled attorneys. "He's fine," Victor said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're the disruption." The boy, small, wearing oversized headphones, rocking gently, didn't even register the confrontation. He was safe in his father's orbit. That was all that mattered. What nobody knew yet was that the man they were about to dismiss would soon be the only person standing between them and a catastrophic hydraulic failure at 35,000 feet. 4:47 in the morning, and SeaTac International smelled like burnt coffee and possibility. Victor adjusted the straps on Mateo's backpack, the blue one with the airplane patches his mother had sewn on 3 summers ago, back when she was still alive to sew things. His son's small hand fit perfectly in his, warm and trusting. 8 years old, nonverbal autistic, obsessed with anything that flew. Elena would have loved this moment. Victor pushed the thought down before it could crack him open in the middle of Terminal C. 3 years since the complications. 3 years of night shifts cleaning Boeing fuselages so he could afford the daytime therapy appointments. 3 years of being both parents, both incomes, both everything. "We're flying today, buddy," he signed with his free hand. Mateo's eyes lit up, the kind of pure joy that made every double shift worth it. The ticket counter line moved slowly. Victor didn't mind. Mateo was calm, watching the departures board like it was showing his favorite movie. Victor worked for Cascade Air Maintenance, a contractor that serviced multiple airlines. He knew every aircraft in this terminal intimately, had scrubbed hydraulic fluid off their bellies, polished their windows, knew which models had temperamental seals and which crews left the best coffee in the cockpits. But he'd never flown as a passenger, not since Elena. This trip was a promise kept. Her family in San Diego had been asking for years. Mateo deserved to meet his grandparents, his cousins, the people who shared his mother's laugh. Victor had saved for 9 months, overtime pay, skipped meals, a second job inspecting fire extinguishers on weekends. The tickets were purchased with Elena's old employee bereavement benefits. 75% off, once per year, family only. He'd memorized the flight number. Western Skyways 1847. The same airline Elena had worked for. The same route she'd flown 100 times. Gate C-17 was crowded. Victor found 2 seats near the window, where Mateo could watch the ground crew. His son pressed his face to the glass, signing excitedly about the baggage tractors. Victor smiled, pulling out the Ziploc bag of sensory tools, the weighted lap pad, the fidget cube, the laminated card showing the airplane's interior layout, so Mateo would know what to expect. "Brennan, Victor Brennan," he looked up. The gate agent, an older woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading Sharon Who, was waving him over. His stomach dropped. Flight cancellations. Overbooked. Something wrong with the tickets. "There's been a change," Sharon said, and Victor's heart prepared for disappointment. Then she smiled. "System shows an overbooking situation in economy. Computer randomly selected your reservation for involuntary upgrade. You and your son are now in first class, 2B and 2C. Victor blinked. "I didn't request." "I know." Sharon's voice softened. "I flew with Elena. Saw her photo when I processed your benefit code." She slid the new boarding passes across the counter. "She's watching out for you two." Victor's throat tightened. He wanted to refuse. First class wasn't the plan. Wasn't what he'd prepared Mateo for. But Sharon was already explaining. If he declined, they'd be bumped to tomorrow's flight. Mateo had been counting down the days on his visual calendar. Missing today would break something fragile. "Thank you," Victor managed. Boarding began 20 minutes later. Victor carried both their bags, his battered duffel, Mateo's backpack, and guided his son down the jetway. The first-class cabin was small, 8 rows, leather seats the color of cream. Everything smelled expensive. Seat 2C was on the aisle. Victor settled Mateo into 2B, the middle seat, immediately deploying the lap pad and helping him adjust his headphones. The boy's breathing steadied. Good. This was manageable. Victor shrugged off his Cascade Air maintenance jacket, the name V. Brennan embroidered over the pocket, an oil stain near the cuff he could never quite wash out, and folded it carefully on his lap. Underneath, he wore a simple gray Henley, clean, unremarkable. On his keychain, an old FAA credential badge caught the overhead light. He'd kept it as a memorial. Elena had given him the leather holder their first Christmas together. The badge itself was inactive now, expired 3 years ago when he'd walked, away from the career that had defined him. Former senior safety inspector. 15 years, dozens of investigations. The hydraulics expert who'd written protocols now taught in aviation schools worldwide. Nobody here knew that. Nobody needed to. He was just a father taking his son to see family. The cabin filled slowly. Business travelers, a few tourists. Then, a woman's voice sharp with irritation. "Excuse me, there's been a mistake." Victor looked up. The woman standing in the aisle wore authority like a second skin. Tailored suit, Diamond Airline status medallion, Bluetooth earpiece blinking. Her eyes fixed on Mateo with the kind of assessment that made Victor's protective instincts flare. She wasn't looking at his son. She was looking at a problem she expected someone else to solve. "That seat should be empty," the woman said, not to Victor, but past him, as if he were furniture. "I always have 2A with 2B blocked, always." Flight attendant Marcus Chen appeared from the galley, his smile professionally warm, but his eyes already calculating the conflict. 29 years old, 5 years with Western Skyways, trained to de-escalate before situations became incidents. "Ma'am, let me check your reservation." Diane Hartwick, Diamond Elite, Seat 2A. She didn't hand him anything, just stood there radiating the certainty of someone who'd never been told no by service staff. "This is my route, Seattle to San Diego, twice monthly, same seat, same buffer arrangement. Someone made an error." Marcus pulled out his tablet, tapped through screens. Victor watched the attendant's expression shift from accommodation to careful neutrality. "Ms. Hartwick, I show 2A assigned to you, but 2B is a confirmed paid passenger. There's no block in the system." "Then the system is wrong." Diane's voice climbed half an octave. She finally looked directly at Mateo, who was tracing patterns on his tablet screen, headphones covering his ears, completely unaware of the storm gathering around him. "Is this child even supposed to be in first class?" Victor felt the familiar ice slide through his chest. The combat calm that used to descend in crisis rooms when engineers panicked and politicians demanded answers nobody had. He'd learned long ago that the most dangerous moment wasn't when someone raised their voice. It was right before. "My son and I have assigned seats," he said quietly. 2B and 2C. Diane's eyes finally registered him, took in the maintenance jacket on his lap, the embroidered name, the oil stain. Her expression shifted from annoyance to understanding, the kind that came with assumptions. "Your airport staff." Not a question, an accusation wrapped in expensive perfume. "You're using some employee benefit to—" "Family bereavement fare," Marcus interrupted gently, reading from his screen. "Legitimate Western Skyways program. Everything's in order, Ms. Hartwick. I can see if there's another first-class seat available." "I don't want another seat. I want my seat with my arrangement." Diane pulled out her phone, her thumbs already flying. "I'm calling my assistant. This is unacceptable. I have calls scheduled, presentations to review, and I specifically pay premium rates to ensure—" She stopped mid-sentence, pressed the phone to her ear. Her voice went from irritated to coldly professional. "Jennifer, I need you to pull up my Western Skyways profile. Something's wrong with my seat assignment. Yes, I'm on the aircraft. Flight 1847. No, I'm not sitting down until this is..." What do you mean the system shows it's correct? Victor returned his attention to Mateo. His son's fingers moved across the tablet, pulling up photos of different aircraft models, his breathing steady beneath the headphones. Good. He was regulated, safe in his routine. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because these kinds of moments, where dignity meets injustice, happen every single day, and someone needs to tell these stories. Diane's call grew louder. I don't care what the override code says. I'm looking at a child in my buffer seat and his father is wearing a maintenance uniform. This is clearly some kind of system abuse. Yes, I'll hold, but this is... She pivoted, noticed other passengers watching, lowered her voice fractionally. But not enough. Never enough for people like her, Victor thought. People who'd spent so long being heard that they'd forgotten how to listen. No, Jennifer, you're not understanding. I have the merger presentation this afternoon. The Coastal Airlines acquisition is worth $800 million. I need 3 hours of uninterrupted work time, which is why I specifically... Mateo's hand went to his headphone, adjusting the fit. The movement was small, unconscious. Just a kid making himself comfortable. Diane saw it. Her irritation found a new target. Is he going to do that the entire flight? She directed this at Marcus, still not acknowledging Victor directly. Because if there's going to be constant fidgeting and... My son has autism, Victor said, his voice level and cold as January steel. He uses movement to regulate his sensory input. If that's going to be a problem for you, I suggest you're the one who needs a different seat. The cabin went very quiet. Diane's mouth opened, closed. Her face flushed, not with shame, but with something uglier. The outrage of being contradicted by someone she'd already mentally dismissed. Excuse me? Her phone lowered. Do you have any idea who you're speaking to? A passenger in seat 2A, Victor replied. Same as I'm a passenger in seat 2C. You're a maintenance worker exploiting bereavement benefits to access premium cabin space your salary couldn't otherwise afford. Each word was precise, surgical. And your special needs child is clearly disrupting. Ma'am! Marcus stepped between them, his professional warmth fracturing into something harder. I need to ask you to lower your voice and take your seat. We're preparing for departure. Diane ignored him. She was staring at Victor now, really seeing him for the first time. The worn jacket, the calloused hands, the quiet defiance that didn't fit her mental category for people who cleaned airplanes. You don't belong here, she said simply. Victor met her eyes, held them. In that moment, he could have told her about the 15 years he'd spent in FAA headquarters, the investigations he'd led, the protocols bearing his name in every commercial aviation manual printed in the last decade, the PhD in aerospace engineering gathering dust in a storage unit because Mateo needed a father more than the industry needed another expert. Instead, he said, neither does your hand on my son, because that's when Diane Hartwick made her first real mistake. She reached across Victor, past his shoulder, and grabbed Mateo's wrist. The boy's humming stopped. His entire body went rigid. The tablet clattered to the floor, and Victor Brennan moved, not violently, not dramatically, but with the absolute precision of someone who'd spent years in situations where one wrong move meant catastrophe. He removed her hand from his son's wrist, thumb pressure on the correct release point, zero excess force, and set it back in her own space as if returning a misplaced object. Don't, he said, touch my child. 30 passengers held their breath. Diane's face went white, then red. How dare you? I'm calling the captain. Marcus, I want these passengers removed immediately. This man just assaulted me. Ma'am, you initiated physical contact with a minor? I don't care. I'm a senior partner at Hartwick & Cole. We represent 3 major airlines in merger litigation. One call from me can... She stopped, because the aircraft had just shuddered. Not much, just enough to rattle the overhead bins and send a coffee cup sliding across an empty tray table. Just enough for everyone to feel it in their stomach. And in the cockpit, a yellow light began to pulse. The hydraulic warning light burned amber against the instrument panel's gray monotone. Captain Reina Okoye's eyes tracked to it instantly. Muscle memory from 10,000 flight hours, 12 years flying C-130 cargo planes through desert sandstorms before she'd ever touched a commercial yoke. System 1 hydraulic pressure, First Officer Jason Treadwell said, his voice tight but controlled. Showing 2850 psi, should be 3,000. Raina's hand moved to the secondary system check. Backup engaged? Yes, ma'am, but it's fluctuating. 2,900 down to 2,720, back up to... He paused. It's not holding steady. Raina exhaled slowly through her nose. They were 12 minutes from scheduled pushback, still at the gate, engines cold. This was the best possible time for a hydraulic anomaly, when passengers could walk off the aircraft instead of wondering if they'd walk away from it. But something about the pressure pattern bothered her. It wasn't a clean drop, wasn't behaving like a simple leak or sensor malfunction. The numbers were dancing in a way that felt familiar, like a word on the tip of her tongue. Run the full diagnostic, she ordered, and get ground ops on the line. We might need maintenance before. The call button from first class chimed, 3 times in rapid succession. Marcus Chen's voice came through the intercom, carefully neutral. Captain, we have a passenger situation in first class, requesting your presence when possible. Raina closed her eyes briefly. Of course, hydraulics acting strange and passenger drama. The aviation gods had a sense of humor. Treadwell, you have the aircraft. I'll handle the cabin. Do not, and I mean do not, dismiss that pressure reading. I want eyes on those numbers every 30 seconds. Yes, ma'am. She stood, straightened her uniform jacket, and stepped into the first-class cabin. The scene assembled itself instantly in her trained assessment. Agitated woman in expensive suit, hand pressed to her chest in theatrical outrage. Calm man in maintenance clothing, hand on a child's shoulder. Flight attendant positioned between them, trying to maintain the peace. And 30 passengers pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. What seems to be the problem? Raina kept her voice level, authoritative without aggression. Diane turned to her like a drowning person spotting a life raft. Captain, thank God, this man, she gestured at Victor without looking at him, just physically assaulted me after I politely requested his disruptive child be relocated from premium seating. I'm a senior partner at Hartwick & Cole. We handle litigation for Coastal Airlines, and I cannot stress enough how inappropriate. Ma'am, Raina's voice could cut steel when necessary. I asked what the problem is. I didn't ask for your resume. Diane's mouth clicked shut. The passengers around them radiated barely suppressed satisfaction. Raina turned to Victor, really looked at him, saw the protective hand on the boy's shoulder, the carefully controlled breathing, the oil stain on the jacket that marked him as someone who worked with machines for a living, but also something else, the stillness of someone trained to stay calm when everything around them was chaos. Sir, is your son all right? The question landed differently than Diane's demands. Victor's expression shifted microscopically, surprise, maybe, that someone in authority cared about the answer. He will be, Victor said quietly, if people stop grabbing him. Raina's eyes narrowed. Someone grabbed your son? She did. Victor's voice remained level, but there was permafrost underneath. Without permission, without warning. He's autistic and doesn't process unexpected touch well. I removed her hand. That's when she started calling it assault. The captain turned back to Diane. You made physical contact with a minor child without parental consent? I was attempting to stop his disruptive behavior. That's not what I asked. Did you touch this child? Diane's face flushed deeper. His constant movement was, yes or no. The child was stimming inappropriately for a premium cabin environment, and as a million-miler with diamond status, I have reasonable expectation. Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat. Raina's command voice activated, the one that used to move entire cargo crews into formation. We'll discuss this further, but federal regulation prohibits physical contact with minors without parental permission. That's not airline policy. That's law. Are you seriously? Diane's voice climbed toward hysteria. Do you understand that one phone call from me can ground your career? I represent the legal interests of 3 major carriers. I know the CEO of Western Skyways personally. If you think some minimum wage maintenance worker and his problem child take priority over... The aircraft shuddered. This time it wasn't subtle. The frame vibrated with enough force that overhead bins rattled and the cabin lights flickered. Passengers gasped. Someone's bag shifted in the overhead compartment with an audible thump. Raina's training kicked in before conscious thought. Her eyes went to the cockpit, to the doorway where she could just see Treadwell's profile, could see him reaching for instruments. "Captain," his voice came through, stress bleeding through the professional calm. "Primary hydraulic pressure just dropped to 2680. Backup system is fluctuating 2700 to 2850. Pattern's getting worse." Diane was still talking, something about legal action and customer service failures, but Raina had already stopped listening. Every cell in her body was focused on those numbers. 2850, dropping to 2720 to 2680 over 90-second intervals. She knew this pattern. She'd seen it before. Not in flight, but in training. A case study from her initial 737 certification, 8 years ago. An incident that never became an accident because someone caught it on the ground. An FAA inspector had written the report. The analysis was so precise, so detailed, that instructors still used it. She'd memorized portions of it for her type rating exam. What was the name? The inspector's name had been unusual, memorable. Started with B. Brennan? Benson? "Marcus," she said, cutting through Diane's continuing tirade. "I need the passenger manifest. Pull it up on your tablet." The flight attendant blinked, confused, but complied. 30 seconds later, he handed her the device. Raina scrolled to first class. Seat assignments, names, booking codes. Seat 2C, Brennan, Victor. Booking code, BRVMT FAM. Western Skyways. Employee family bereavement benefit. Her pulse kicked up. Bereavement. Family member of an employee. She pulled up the linked account name from the booking history. Brennan, Elena, flight attendant, deceased. October 2022. Elena. Brennan, the memorial service in Hangar 7 3 years ago. The young flight attendant who died from pregnancy complications, leaving behind a husband and infant son. Raina looked at the man in seat 2C, at the child beside him, who'd be about 8 now, at the name embroidered on the maintenance jacket, V. Brennan. Could it be? She pulled up her tablet's saved training documents, scrolled back through years of certification materials, found the hydraulic systems folder. There, the case study. Boeing 737-800 series, hydraulic pressure anomaly, October 2015. Author, Senior Inspector Victor Brennan, FAA Safety Division. The man sitting in front of her had the same name as the inspector who'd written the definitive protocol on 737-800 hydraulic failures. Too common a name to be certain, except she looked at him again, at the way he was breathing, slow, controlled, like someone managing stress through training rather than emotion, at the way he'd assessed the cabin shudder, not with fear, but with calculation. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice cutting through everything else happening in the cabin. Victor looked up at her. "Would you happen to be Victor Brennan, formerly with the FAA Safety Division?" The entire cabin went silent. Even Diane stopped talking. The question hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Victor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, the involuntary straightening of a soldier hearing their name called. 30 passengers leaned forward in their seats without realizing it. Marcus's tablet nearly slipped from his hands. Diane's mouth opened slightly, her tirade dying mid-breath. "Yes, ma'am," Victor said quietly. "That's correct." The cabin seemed to contract. Captain Okoye felt her pulse spike, not from stress, but from the sharp relief of pattern recognition clicking into place. The hydraulic fluctuation, the pressure signature, the name she'd memorized 8 years ago while studying for her type rating. "How long has it been since you worked aviation safety?" 3 years. I left the FAA after my wife passed." Victor's hand remained steady on Mateo's shoulder. The boy had picked his tablet back up, oblivious to the tension crackling through the first-class cabin. "I maintain my certifications, but they're inactive." "But current?" "Yes." Raina's mind was already moving through the decision tree. Protocol said she should deplane everyone, call ground maintenance, wait for the on-call inspector to arrive from wherever he was stuck in Seattle morning traffic, minimum 4-hour delay. Maybe longer if the pressure issue required parts. But protocol was written for normal circumstances, and sitting 6 feet away was a man who'd literally written the emergency procedures she'd studied. "We have a hydraulic pressure anomaly," she said, her voice dropping to the tone she reserved for crew briefings. "Borderline readout. Could be sensor malfunction, could be genuine system degradation. The pattern is..." She paused, aware that every passenger was listening, that what she said next would either cause panic or prevent it. "Irregular." Victor's eyes sharpened. She watched him process the information, saw the shift from protective father to something else, something older and more precise. "What aircraft?" he asked. 737-800, manufactured October 2009. His expression changed again. Not much, just enough for her to see recognition. "And the pressure reading?" His voice had shifted too, lost the soft edges of someone talking to his child. This was the voice of someone who'd stood in front of congressional committees and explained why metal failed, Raina told him. 2850 dropping to 2720, stabilizing briefly, then dropping to 2680. 90-second intervals, backup system engaged but fluctuating. She watched Victor close his eyes, not from stress, from concentration. His fingers twitched slightly against Mateo's shoulder, unconscious calculation, the physical manifestation of a mind accessing a database built from 15 years of failure analysis and metallurgical studies and incident reports written at 3 a.m. Around them, passengers had stopped pretending not to listen. This wasn't a customer service dispute anymore. This was something else. Diane sat frozen in 2A, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, horror. The maintenance worker she'd tried to have removed was being consulted by the captain about aircraft systems. The child she'd called disruptive was sitting quietly while his father's expertise was being quietly, desperately needed. Victor's eyes opened. When he spoke, his voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who'd seen this pattern before and knew exactly what it meant. "It's not the sensor," he said. "That's parasitic fluctuation from valve seal degradation in the aft hydraulic reservoir." Treadwell's voice crackled through from the cockpit. "Captain, pressure just dropped again. 2650 now. Do we abort boarding?" Raina held up one hand, her eyes locked on Victor. "Explain." The seals in the 2008 through 2011 production series were manufactured with a polymer compound that degrades under thermal cycling, specifically when aircraft sit overnight in temperatures below 40 degrees Fahrenheit and then undergo rapid system power-up during pre-flight. Victor's voice remained calm, clinical. "Seattle had frost warnings last night. I saw it on the weather report this morning." Marcus made a small sound. Someone in row 3 whispered, "Jesus Christ," under their breath. "If you taxi and build pressure for takeoff rotation," Victor continued, "the seal will fail completely, catastrophically. You'll lose primary hydraulics at the worst possible moment. Rotation speed, when you're committed to flight but not yet airborne. Backup system will engage, but you'll be landing immediately with compromised control authority and a full fuel load," the words landed. Like stones in water, rippling through the cabin. A woman 2 rows back started breathing faster. A man across the aisle gripped his armrest. Raina forced herself to think like a captain, not a student. Can it be visually confirmed? Only with the engine cowling removed and thermal imaging equipment. The seal degradation happens internally, but the pressure pattern doesn't lie. Victor met her eyes, and she saw something in them that made her throat tight. "I've seen this exact signature 4 times in my career. 3 times we caught it on the ground. The 4th time..." He stopped. Didn't need to finish. She could see the answer in the deliberate blankness of his expression. "The 4th time, someone died." "How certain are you?" Raina asked, though she already knew the answer. "Absolutely certain." The captain's hand moved to her radio before conscious thought. "Ground ops, this is Western Skyways Flight 1847. We are initiating emergency deboarding protocol for critical hydraulic system failure. I need maintenance with thermal imaging equipment to aft reservoir, priority 1. Flag this as potential valve seal degradation under Inspector Brennan's protocol." She turned back to the cabin, to the sea of faces watching her, with various expressions of fear and confusion and dawning understanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to deplane as a precautionary measure. There will be a delay while maintenance performs a detailed inspection." Her voice carried the command authority that had once moved cargo pallets across active runways under mortar fire. I apologize for the inconvenience, but passenger safety is always, always our first priority. Then she did something she'd never done in 10 years of commercial aviation. She turned to a passenger, made direct eye contact, and said over the PA system loud enough for the entire aircraft to hear, "I also want to personally thank passenger Victor Brennan, former FAA Senior Safety Inspector, whose expertise may have just prevented a very serious incident." She paused, let the words sink in. "Mr. Brennan, Western Skyways, and everyone on this flight owes you our gratitude." The cabin erupted, not with panic, with applause. It started in row 5, a businessman in a rumpled suit who'd been pretending to sleep. Then row 3 joined in. Then row 1. The sound built like a wave, passengers turning in their seats to look at the man in the maintenance jacket, the quiet father who'd been dismissed and degraded and told he didn't belong. Victor didn't acknowledge it. His entire focus remained on Mateo, his hands moving in practiced sign language. "Safe. Papa's here. The plane is going to rest. We'll fly later. You're okay." But Diane heard every clap, every murmured, "Thank God," and "Did you hear that?" and "He saved us." She sat perfectly still in seat 2A, her face the color of paper, as passengers began gathering their belongings. Marcus moved through the aisle helping people, his eyes deliberately avoiding hers. A woman from row 4 touched Victor's shoulder as she passed. "Thank you," she whispered. A man with a briefcase nodded to him. "Appreciate you, brother." An elderly couple both smiled, the wife signing "Thank you" in ASL, that Victor returned with a slight nod. And Diane Hartwick, senior partner, Diamond Elite, Million Miler, the woman who knew the CEO personally, could only sit and watch as everyone filed past the maintenance worker she'd tried to have removed, the man who'd just saved her life. The jetway smelled like rubber and recycled air. Victor guided Mateo through the deplaning passengers, one hand on his son's shoulder, the other carrying their bags. The boy was signing questions. "Why are we leaving? When do we fly? Is the plane broken?" And Victor answered each one with patient precision. Behind them, the aircraft sat like a beached whale, maintenance crews already swarming the aft section with equipment Victor recognized from his previous life. Thermal cameras, pressure gauges, the specialized tools required to access the hydraulic reservoir without depressurizing the entire system. He'd specified those tools in a technical bulletin 9 years ago. Watching other people use them felt surreal. "Mr. Brennan?" He turned. Captain Okoye stood 3 feet away, her uniform still crisp, despite the adrenaline that had just flooded through her system. Her eyes carried the specific exhaustion of someone who'd just stared down a disaster that hadn't happened yet. "I need to know something," she said quietly. "The 4th time. The one you didn't catch on the ground." Victor's jaw tightened. Mateo was distracted by the window, watching the maintenance crews, so Victor allowed himself the truth. Trans-Pacific charter flight, 2017. SEAL failed during rotation at Manila International. They got it back on the ground, but the emergency landing gear extension damaged the fuselage. 14 injuries, 2 critical. But everyone lived? Because the pilots were former military and knew how to dead stick with partial hydraulics. Victor's voice went flat. "I wrote the incident report. Recommended immediate inspection protocols for all 2008-2011 models. Boeing issued the service bulletin 3 months later. By then, I'd already seen the security footage of passengers being carried off on stretchers." Raina nodded slowly. "That's why you left." "That's why I stayed." Victor looked at Mateo. "My wife died 2 months after that incident. Pregnancy complications that turned catastrophic. I had a 6-month-old who needed a father more than the FAA needed another inspector, so I found work that let me be present. Night maintenance, flexible schedule, lower pay, but I'm there for his therapy appointments. You gave up a career saving lives to save one life. I gave up a career analyzing failures to prevent one." Victor's hand moved to the keychain in his pocket, the expired FAA badge Elena had given him. "Turns out, those aren't the same thing." The captain was quiet for a moment. Then, "For what it's worth, you just saved 180 people, including my crew, including me. We don't know that yet. Could still be a sensor fault. You and I both know it's not." Victor didn't argue. They both knew. Raina extended her hand. "Thank you, Inspector. I'm not an inspector anymore. Today you were." They shook. Her grip was firm, respectful, the handshake of one professional acknowledging another. "The maintenance chief will want to talk to you," Raina said. "Probably Boeing's safety liaison, too. They'll have questions about the pressure signature, the thermal cycling factors. This could update the entire service bulletin protocol. I'm on vacation with my son. I know, but..." She paused. "People should know what you did today, not just the passengers, the industry." Victor looked at her for a long moment, saw the offer beneath the words. A path back to the career he'd abandoned, the expertise he'd mothballed, the identity he'd folded up and put away like his old credentials. "Captain," he said gently, "I appreciate it, but I chose my priorities 3 years ago. They haven't changed." Before Raina could respond, a maintenance supervisor jogged up, tablet in hand. "Captain Okoye, we've got initial thermal imaging results. You're going to want to see this." They moved to a nearby monitor the ground crew had set up. Victor followed, Mateo still holding his hand, the boy's eyes wide as he watched the aircraft being examined like a patient in surgery. The thermal image showed the aft hydraulic reservoir in false color, blues and greens for cool areas, yellows and reds for heat signatures. And there, exactly where Victor had predicted, a bright orange bloom around the valve seal housing. Temperature differential of 42 degrees between the seal housing and surrounding components, the supervisor read. Consistent with friction degradation and imminent failure. If we'd push back... He stopped, looked at Victor. "You're the inspector who called this in?" "Former inspector," Victor corrected. "Well, former or not, you just saved a lot of lives. We're pulling the seal now for metallurgical analysis, but I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've never seen a thermal signature this clear. Another 10 minutes of pressure cycling and..." He made a gesture that needed no translation. The supervisor's radio crackled. A voice came through. "Seal is out. Visual confirmation of advanced polymer degradation. Multiple stress fractures. This thing was maybe one pressure cycle from catastrophic failure." The small group went quiet. One pressure cycle. One taxi. One push toward the runway. Victor felt Mateo tug his hand. His son was signing. "Papa, did you fix the plane?" "Not quite, buddy," Victor signed back. "I told them what was wrong. They fixed it. Did you save everyone? I helped keep everyone safe." Mateo considered this, then signed with the earnest certainty of an 8-year-old. Mama would be proud. Victor's throat closed. He managed a nod, couldn't trust himself to sign a response. Behind him, Diane Hartwick stood near the gate desk, phone pressed to her ear. But she wasn't talking. She was watching Victor with his son, watching the maintenance crews treating him with deference, watching the captain who'd consulted him like a colleague rather than a passenger. Her assistant's voice carried faintly from the phone. "Miss Hartwick, are you there? Should I file the complaint against the airline?" Diane's finger hovered over the end call button. The maintenance supervisor was shaking Victor's hand now, saying something about protocols and updated service bulletins and whether he'd be willing to consult on the metallurgical analysis. "I'm just here to take my son to see his grandparents," Victor said quietly. "When can we expect a replacement aircraft?" 2 hours, maybe 3. We're repositioning from the satellite terminal. Then we'll be in the family waiting area. Come get us when it's time to board. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because stories like this, where quiet competence defeats loud arrogance, need to be told. And you won't want to miss what happens when they finally get back on that plane. Victor collected their bags and led Mateo toward the concourse. Passengers from the flight were scattered through the gate area, some on phones, some getting coffee, some still processing what had almost happened. Several nodded to him as he passed. One man stood up, said, "Hey, thank you," with the kind of sincerity that only comes from narrowly avoided disaster. Victor nodded back but kept moving. He wasn't looking for recognition, hadn't been looking for any of this. He just wanted to take his son on a plane trip. And somehow, without planning it, without wanting it, he'd done the thing he'd walked away from 3 years ago. He'd stood between people and catastrophe. The old instincts hadn't died, they'd just been sleeping. Diane watched them disappear into the concourse, the maintenance worker and his son, and realized with dawning horror that she'd called this man who'd just prevented her death, a problem. She ended the call without saying goodbye. Then she did something she hadn't done in 15 years of corporate litigation. She sat down in an airport chair and wondered if she'd become the kind of person her younger self would have hated. The family waiting area near gate C-17 was designed for exactly this: stranded passengers, delayed flights, the liminal space between departure and destination. Victor found 2 seats near the window where Mateo could watch aircraft operations. His son immediately pressed his nose to the glass, tracking a baggage cart with the focus of a scientist observing particle collision. Victor pulled out the tablet, loaded Mateo's comfort playlist, ambient engine sounds, the rhythmic whoosh of cabin air circulation. The boy's shoulders relaxed. Good, structure restored, world made predictable again. "We'll fly soon," Victor signed. "Different plane, same destination." Mateo signed back. "The broken plane scared you?" "No, buddy. The broken plane needed help. We helped." "You're good at helping planes." Victor's chest tightened. "I used to be. Now I'm just good at being your papa." Mateo smiled, returned to his window vigil, and Victor leaned back in the chair that was already making his lower back ache. 3 hours minimum before the replacement aircraft arrived. 3 hours of Mateo managing his regulation in an unpredictable environment. 3 hours of Mr. Brennan. A woman stood in front of him, mid-50s, Western Skyways uniform with 4 stripes on her shoulders, captain's wings. Her name tag read Morrison. "I'm Sarah Morrison, chief pilot for Western Skyways Pacific Northwest region." She offered her hand. "Captain Okoye briefed me on what happened, on what you identified." Victor shook her hand but remained seated. "Just pattern recognition. Any inspector with 737-800 experience would have caught it. Except, we didn't have any inspector with 737-800 experience available for at least 90 minutes. Morrison's expression was serious. "And based on the maintenance findings, we didn't have 90 minutes. You called a catastrophic seal failure from cabin pressure readings and aircraft manufacture date. That's not pattern recognition. That's mastery. It's out-of-date knowledge from a job I don't do anymore." Morrison studied him for a long moment. "Elena Brennan was one of our best. I flew with her dozens of times. She talked about you constantly. The FAA inspector who could diagnose aircraft failures from coffee shop Wi-Fi, who wrote technical bulletins that read like detective novels. She was so proud of what you did." Victor's jaw worked. "That was before she passed. I know. I was at the memorial." Morrison glanced at Mateo, who was still absorbed in the window view. "She also talked about wanting to start a family, about hoping you'd find a way to balance the work you loved with the life you wanted. There was no balance. There was a choice. And you chose him. Every single time." Morrison nodded slowly, then did something unexpected. She sat down in the seat next to Victor, close enough for privacy but not invasive. Her voice dropped to the tone of someone speaking truth instead of protocol. "I'm going to be direct because Elena wouldn't want me to dance around this. We need people like you. Not just Western Skyways, the entire industry. The FAA's safety division has been hemorrhaging expertise since the MAX disasters. Boeing's technical liaison program is staffed by engineers who've never investigated an actual incident. And we're flying more passengers than ever on aircraft that are aging faster than the inspection protocols can keep up. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a conversation with people who understand that being a father isn't a disqualification. It's an asset. That night shift maintenance work is crushing you, even if you won't admit it. That your son would benefit from seeing his father use the expertise that defines him, not just store it away like it never mattered." Victor looked at Mateo, at the tablet in the boy's hands showing airplane schematics, at the way his son's fingers traced the hydraulic system diagrams with the same careful precision Victor once used in investigation reports. "I can't do field investigations. I can't travel for weeks at a time. I can't miss therapy appointments or IEP meetings or the moments when he needs me. What if I told you the FAA's new remote consultation program allows senior inspectors to work hybrid schedules? What if I said Boeing's desperate enough for expertise that they'd structure roles around family needs instead of forcing families around work demands?" Morrison pulled out a business card. "What if I told you Elena made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd make sure you didn't lose yourself completely?" Victor took the card, didn't look at it. "She asked you that?" 2 weeks before she went on maternity leave, she knew the risks. She also knew you'd sacrifice everything for your child, including the parts of yourself that made you who you are. Morrison stood. She didn't want that. She wanted you to show him that being a great father and being great at your work weren't mutually exclusive. Before Victor could respond, his phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. The thermal analysis is conclusive. The seal would have failed within 3 to 5 minutes of taxi. You didn't just identify a problem. You prevented a probable hull loss event with potential fatalities. The Seattle FAA office wants to debrief you. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Regional Director Chen. Victor stared at the message. Hull loss event. The clinical term for an aircraft destroyed beyond repair. Potential fatalities. The euphemism for people who don't come home. Morrison saw his expression. They're going to want to know how you identified it so quickly, how you connected manufacture date, overnight temperature, and pressure fluctuation into a diagnosis that precise. I read the data. You saw what no one else saw, from a passenger seat, while being harassed by an entitled attorney who thought you were just maintenance crew. Morrison's voice sharpened. Do you understand what that means? It means your instincts are still active, still sharp, still saving lives even when you're trying to walk away from the work. Mateo tugged Victor's sleeve. Signed, Papa, the plane with our luggage is moving. Victor looked. Sure enough, Flight 1847's original aircraft was being towed toward a maintenance hangar, a truck with yellow warning lights leading the way, the plane that would have killed them all if they'd taken off. You stop that plane, Mateo signed, his expression serious. You're a hero. No, buddy, I'm just someone who remembered something important. Mama taught me that remembering important things is how we keep people safe. Victor's throat closed again. He pulled Mateo close, kissed the top of his head. Morrison cleared her throat gently. The offer stands. No pressure, no timeline. But Victor, Elena wasn't wrong about you, and neither was Captain Okoye when she called you inspector today. Some people are meant to do specific work in this world, not because it's easy, but because they're the only ones who can do it right. She walked away, leaving Victor with the business card and the text message and the weight of a choice he thought he'd already made 3 years ago. Across the terminal, Diane Hartwick stood at a coffee kiosk, credit card in hand, frozen mid-transaction. She'd heard every word, watched the chief pilot sit down with the maintenance worker, seen the respect, the deference, the careful acknowledgement of expertise. The barista asked if she wanted room for cream. Diane didn't hear her. She was calculating. The man she'd grabbed, the child she'd called disruptive, the expertise she'd dismissed as minimum wage maintenance work, former FAA senior safety inspector, published protocols, industry mastery, the person who just prevented a hull loss event. And she'd tried to have him removed from the aircraft. The coffee cup shook in her hand. 2 hours and 40 minutes felt like geological time when measured in airport terminal chairs. Victor had walked Mateo through the concourse 3 times, once for physical regulation, once because his son wanted to watch the departure boards update, once because standing still made the waiting worse. Now they sat in a different gate area, C-23, where the replacement aircraft was being prepared. The plane had been repositioned from a satellite terminal, a newer 737 MAX that had completed its morning flight from Portland. Fresh crew, clean systems, no degraded seals waiting to fail at rotation speed. Mateo was calm, headphones on, watching a documentary about aircraft manufacturing. Victor watched his son's face, saw Elena's expressions mirrored in the boy's focused concentration, the way he tilted his head at technical explanations, the small smile when the narrator described hydraulic systems. Their son loved planes the way Elena had. It wasn't grief, it was inheritance. Victor's phone buzzed again. Another text from Regional Director Chen, this one more insistent. The FAA wanted a formal debrief. Boeing's safety liaison wanted to consult on updating the service bulletin. Western Skyway's legal team wanted a statement for their incident report. He'd ignored them all. Chief Pilot Morrison's business card sat in his wallet next to Elena's photo. He'd looked at it 6 times in the past hour. Each time, he'd put it away without making a decision. The parts of yourself that made you who you are. Elena's voice filtered through Morrison's memory. Had she really said that? Or was Morrison just doing what administrators did, recruiting talent by leveraging emotional connection? It didn't matter. The question underneath remained, Could he be both? The father Mateo needed and the inspector the industry wanted? Attention passengers waiting for Western Skyways, Flight 1847 to San Diego. The gate agent's voice cut through his thoughts. We'll begin boarding in approximately 20 minutes. First class and Diamond Elite passengers may board at this time. Victor gathered their bags. Mateo looked up, signed. Same seats? Same seats, buddy. Different plane. Will it be safe this time? It was always going to be safe. We just made sure of it before we flew. Mateo processed this with the literalism of someone whose brain didn't do metaphor. You made it safer. That's different than always safe. Victor smiled despite himself. You're right. I made it safer. They approached the gate. The agent, a different person than Sharon, younger, uncertain, scanned their boarding passes and paused. Mr. Brennan, there's a note on your reservation. Captain Vargas would like to speak with you before boarding if you have a moment. Victor's hand tightened on Mateo's shoulder. Is there a problem? No, sir. She wanted to introduce herself. They were directed to the jetway entrance where a woman in captain's uniform waited. Late 30s, dark hair pulled back, eyes that assessed without judgment. Her name tag read Vargas. Mr. Brennan, I'm Captain Lisa Vargas. I'll be flying you to San Diego today. She extended her hand. Captain Okoye briefed me on this morning's incident, on what you identified. I wanted to personally thank you and assure you that this aircraft has been fully inspected. We're not taking any chances. Victor shook her hand. I appreciate that. I also wanted you to know... Vargas glanced at Mateo, then back to Victor. If at any point during the flight you have concerns about anything, you have direct access to the cockpit. No questions asked. Your expertise is welcome here. Something in Victor's chest loosened slightly. That won't be necessary, but thank you. It's not just courtesy, it's recognition. Vargas's voice dropped. I started my career as a regional first officer the year you published the Hydraulic Systems Bulletin. That document is still mandatory reading for 737 type ratings. You've saved more lives than you know, Inspector. I'm not... You were this morning, and from what I understand, you still are. She stepped aside, gestured toward the aircraft. Welcome aboard, Mr. Brennan, both of you. They boarded into a first-class cabin that looked identical to the previous aircraft, but felt completely different. New plane smell, clean leather, systems humming with the confidence of metal that hadn't been stressed by thermal cycling and polymer degradation. Seats 2B and 2C. Same as before, except this time, when they settled in, the passengers around them knew who Victor was. The businessman in row 3 nodded respectfully. The couple in row 1 smiled. A flight attendant, not Marcus, but someone who'd clearly been briefed, asked if Mateo needed anything specific for the flight. He's fine, Victor said quietly. Thank you. And then Diane Hartwick boarded. She moved down the aisle slowly, carry-on rolling behind her, eyes fixed straight ahead. Her suit looked rumpled now, her hair less perfect. The Bluetooth earpiece was gone. She looked smaller somehow, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. She reached row 2, stopped. Victor was helping Mateo adjust his seatbelt. He felt her presence before he looked up. When he did, their eyes met. Diane opened her mouth, closed it. Whatever she'd planned to say dissolved under the weight of what had happened between them. She started, then stopped. Victor waited, didn't help her, didn't make it easier. I didn't know, Diane finally said. The words came out hollow, defensive, a statement of fact rather than an apology. You didn't ask, Victor replied, his voice level and cool as winter steel. Diane flinched. The truth of it landed like a physical blow. She hadn't asked, hadn't wondered, hadn't considered that the man in the maintenance jacket might be anything other than what his clothing suggested. She'd seen labor and assumed limitation, seen humility and assumed incompetence, seen a father protecting his disabled child and assumed disruption. Your son, she tried again. Is he autistic? Victor finished. And he's fine. He's always been fine. The subtext hung between them. You were the problem, not him. Diane's face went pale. She gripped her carry-on handle tighter, knuckles white. I have a nephew, my sister's son. He's similar. She doesn't fly with him anymore because people. She stopped, hearing the words coming out of her mouth, recognizing herself in the unnamed people. Victor's expression didn't change. He wasn't going to give her absolution, wasn't going to make this comfortable. "I'm sorry," Diane said finally. The words came out raw, unpracticed. "I'm sorry I touched him. I'm sorry I said those things. I was—" She paused, searching for justification that wouldn't sound worse than silence. "You were used to being listened to," Victor said quietly. "And when you weren't, you used the tools you had: power, status, volume. Yes." The admission cost her something. "Those tools don't work on hydraulic systems." Victor's voice remained gentle, but the truth underneath was sharp. "They don't work on children either." Diane nodded slowly. She looked like someone who'd just seen herself clearly for the first time and didn't like the view. "For what it's worth, I'll be withdrawing from the airline merger case. Conflict of interest." Victor didn't ask what she meant. The implication was clear. She'd been representing Coastal Airlines in their acquisition of Western Skyways. Being saved by a Western Skyways passenger from a catastrophic failure she'd nearly caused through her own arrogance created complications her legal ethics couldn't navigate. She was choosing professional consequence as a form of accountability. Victor gave a single nod. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Diane moved to seat 2A, sat down, didn't pull out her phone, didn't open her laptop, didn't resume the performance of importance she'd been playing that morning. She just sat there, small and quiet, as the cabin filled around her. The cabin door sealed, and the replacement aircraft settled into a steady breath of conditioned air. Overhead, bins clicked shut. A flight attendant did the final walk, checking latches and faces. In 2B, Mateo pressed both palms to his headphones as the engine spooled. His eyes flicked to his father. "We're okay," Victor signed. "Same steps, push back, taxi, take off." Mateo nodded, then signed. "No bad shaking?" "Normal shaking," his father answered. "Not dangerous shaking." In 2A, Diane sat with her hands folded in her lap. No laptop, no calls. She stared at the seat back like it might speak. The intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Western Skyways Flight 1847 to San Diego. This is Captain Lisa Vargas." Her voice was calm, bright, and unmistakably in command. "Thank you for your patience today. The earlier delay was the result of a safety precaution. We will always choose caution over schedule. We are now cleared to push back and taxi, and you can expect a smooth flight time of about 2 hours and 35 minutes. A pause, deliberate. "I also want to acknowledge a passenger who helped our team make the right call earlier this morning. Mr. Brennan, thank you for your professionalism and your service to aviation safety." A ripple of applause moved through first class, smaller than before but warmer, like the cabin had decided what respect looks like. A few people turned. Victor kept his eyes on his son and signed. "People are happy. You're safe." Mateo signed back. "Because you helped the plane listen." "That's a good way to say it," his father replied. Diane did not turn. Her cheeks colored anyway. The aircraft rolled toward the runway. Mateo's breathing quickened as they lined up. Victor placed the weighted pad across his son's lap and tapped twice, their small ritual. "Ready," Victor signed. Mateo signed, "Ready." The takeoff push pressed everyone into their seats. The roar filled the cabin. Mateo stiffened, then relaxed as his father's hand stayed firm on his forearm, pressure in the exact place that calmed his nervous system. The nose lifted. The ground fell away. Diane's knuckles went white on the armrest. For a second, she looked like she might bolt from her seat. Victor noticed the tremor in her breath, then turned back to Mateo, choosing his child over her panic. At 10,000 feet, the cabin chimes sounded. Seatbelt signs dimmed. A flight attendant approached row 2 with a tablet. She kept her body angled so she didn't crowd Mateo. "Sir, I'm Jenna. I'm completing our report from the earlier aircraft. I need a few details, if that's all right." Victor nodded. "Did the passenger in 2A make physical contact with your child?" Diane's head turned a fraction. She heard every word. "Yes," Victor said. She grabbed his wrist. "Did you tell her to stop?" "Yes." "Did she comply immediately?" He chose accuracy over anger. "Not immediately. I removed her hand." Jenna typed. "Thank you. Your son is nonverbal, correct?" "He uses a tablet and sign language." "I'll note that," Jenna said. Our corporate security team will follow up after landing. It's standard when a minor is touched without consent. Diane's fingers tightened on the armrest. Jenna lowered her voice. Is he okay now? He's stable. He needs predictable space. I understand. She placed a bottle of water and an unopened snack on the tray table. For him, if he wants. Mateo glanced at the snack and signed. Later. Jenna gave a small nod and moved on. If you're still with me, subscribe right now. Because the real story isn't about first-class seats or fancy titles. It's about what happens when someone finally learns that dignity is not a perk you can purchase. The cabin settled into cruise. Sunlight brightened the wing. Mateo returned to his video, calmer now, the engine hum turning from threat into background. Victor watched him, steady, listening anyway for anything that felt off. Not fear, just habit. The same habit that kept people alive. In 2A, Diane stared at the safety card in the seat pocket, lips moving silently. Then she pulled out her phone, opened a blank note, and typed 3 words, paused, deleted them, and typed them again. I touched him. Victor didn't look over. He just stayed where he belonged, inside his son's orbit. A soft presence appeared at the curtain near the cockpit. Jenna returned and crouched slightly to keep her voice gentle. Captain Vargas asked me to tell you something, she said. After we land, she'd like to invite your son to see the cockpit, if you're comfortable. No cameras, no spectacle, just a quick hello. Mateo's hands rose fast, excited, signing, cockpit, really? Victor smiled. Yes, buddy, really. And in 2A, Diane heard that too. The plane touched down with a clean, confident thump, the kind of landing pilots are proud of. Applause rippled through the cabin, brief and sincere, then settled into the shuffle of arrival. Seatbelts clicked open. Overhead, bins popped. The smell of warm brakes drifted in faintly. Mateo leaned forward, eyes bright, and signed, We made it. Yes, Victor signed back. We made it. The aisle filled quickly. Passengers stood, stretched, checked phones. A man from row 3 paused beside Victor, lowered his voice. Thank you again, he said. My wife flies a lot for work. I'm glad people like you exist. Victor nodded once. He didn't. Collect praise. He let it pass through him like weather. Jenna returned, gesturing gently. Captain Vargas is ready whenever you are. They waited until the aisle cleared. Diane remained seated in 2A, hands folded, gaze fixed on the seat back. She didn't move as Victor and Mateo stepped into the aisle. She didn't speak. The silence felt deliberate, like a boundary she was finally respecting. The cockpit door stood open. Inside, screens glowed, switches hummed softly. Captain Vargas turned, her smile easy but professional. Welcome aboard, she said to Mateo. I hear you like airplanes. Mateo nodded hard, then signed. I like how they work. So do I, Vargas said. She crouched to his height. Do you want to see how we talk to the plane? She pointed to the primary flight display. Mateo leaned in, careful not to touch. His breathing stayed even. Victor watched the way his son took in the information, methodical and calm. This tells us how fast we're going, Vargas explained. This tells us how high, and this one tells us if anything needs attention. Mateo signed, like when it says help? Exactly, Vargas said. And today, someone noticed the plane asking for help before it shouted. Mateo looked at his father, signed, you listened. Victor felt the familiar tightness, the ache that came with truth. I did. Vargas straightened. Before you go, there's something I need to do. She turned to Jenna, who was standing by with a tablet. Please note that the passenger from seat 2C assisted crew decision-making prior to departure. Non-operational consultation. Observational only. Jenna nodded, typing. This matters, Vargas said quietly to Victor. Records are how the industry learns. Your contribution won't be buried. I don't need credit. I know, she said, but the system does. They stepped back into the jetway. The terminal buzzed with San Diego brightness, palm-lined posters, and vacation energy. Elena's parents were waiting beyond security, Victor knew, probably scanning every face. As they entered the terminal, a uniformed security supervisor approached, respectful and calm. Sir, a brief word? Victor nodded. We've documented the earlier physical contact involving your child, the supervisor said. Corporate will follow up. You're not required to do anything further today. If you choose to, your statement is on file. Thank you, Victor said. Mateo tugged his sleeve, signed, Grandma and Grandpa? Straight ahead, Victor answered. Behind them, Diane exited the aircraft alone. She paused near the window overlooking the runway. The old plane sat in a hangar bay, panels open, a patient under care. She watched ground crews move with purpose, remembered how easily she'd dismissed the man who understood all of it. Her phone vibrated, a calendar reminder for the afternoon meeting. She opened a new message instead and typed carefully, deleting, retyping, choosing each word like it mattered now. I crossed a line today. I hurt a child. I won't be taking the airline case forward. Conflict of interest. I'll explain when we speak. She sent it, then stood still, letting the consequences arrive. Victor spotted Elena's parents near baggage claim. Mateo broke into a small run, then stopped himself, remembered the rules, and walked fast instead. Hugs followed, careful and warm. Tears came, quiet and necessary. You flew, her mother said to Mateo. Mateo nodded, then signed with pride. Papa helped the plane. Her father looked at Victor, understanding more than words could carry. He squeezed Victor's shoulder. As they walked toward the exit, Victor felt the day settle into place. No banners, no speeches, just the right things happening in the right order. Outside, sunlight wrapped them all. Mateo signed one last thought, small and certain. We listened, Victor signed back. And the plane listened too. The San Diego air felt different, warmer and salt-edged, like the day itself had decided to exhale. Victor walked beside Elena's parents toward the parking structure, Mateo's hand tucked securely in his. The boy kept glancing back toward the terminal windows, as if the plane might wave goodbye. Papa, Mateo signed, thoughtful. The plane was brave. Victor smiled. The people were brave. The plane just did what it was told. They reached the car. Bags were loaded, doors closed. For the first time since Seattle, Victor felt the weight lift from between his shoulders. The crisis was behind them. The confrontation had ended without shouting or spectacle. Dignity had held. At a red light near the airport exit, Victor's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He considered ignoring it. Then he answered, This is Victor Brennan. Mr. Brennan, this is Lydia Ross from Western Skyways Corporate Security. I want to be clear. You're not in any trouble. I'm calling to formally close the incident report from Flight 1847. Victor waited. The passenger in Seat 2A acknowledged physical contact with a minor and provided a written statement. Based on crew reports and witness accounts, her elite travel privileges are under review. Additionally, the airline has issued a formal apology to you and your son. It will be in writing by tonight. I'm not looking for punishment, Victor said. I just want my son treated like a person. We understand, Ross replied. That's why we're also reviewing cabin crew training regarding neurodivergent passengers. Your case will be used as a learning reference. Use it, Victor said. That's the point. The call ended. He slipped the phone back into his pocket as the car rolled onto the freeway. Mateo signed from the back seat. Are we in trouble? No, Victor answered. We did everything right. That night, after dinner and gentle conversations about Elena, Victor sat on the balcony of his in-laws' apartment. The city hummed below. Mateo slept inside, exhausted but peaceful, clutching the laminated cockpit photo Captain Vargas had printed for him. Victor took out his wallet. Elena's photo, the FAA badge, Morrison's card, the message from Regional Director Chen still unread beyond the preview. He finally opened it. The language was formal. The implications were not. A request for consultation, a proposal for a remote safety advisory role, flexible hours, no travel, work that mattered. Victor closed the phone and stared at the ocean lights. He didn't decide anything yet. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen. Mateo sat at the table with his grandparents, lining up toy planes by model and color. Victor poured coffee, listening to the quiet rhythm of family life. His phone buzzed again. This time, he recognized the name, Diane Hartwick. He considered letting it go to voicemail. Then he answered. Mr. Brennan, she said. Her voice was steady, stripped of the sharp edges he remembered. I won't take much of your time. Go ahead. I withdrew from the merger case last night. My firm wasn't happy. That's not your concern. She paused. I wanted to tell you that I've scheduled a meeting with my sister about her son, about flying again. Victor said nothing. I also filed a formal apology with the airline, not to protect myself, to put it on record. Her breath caught. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know I'm not pretending it didn't happen. Good, Victor said. Pretending is how this keeps happening. There was silence on the line. I'm learning, Diane said quietly, late but sincerely. That's between you and your family, Victor replied. My responsibility is my son. I know. A pause. Thank you for answering. The call ended. Mateo looked up from the table, sensing the shift. Signed. That was the loud lady? Yes, Victor signed back. Is she better now? She's trying. Mateo considered this. Signed, trying matters. Victor nodded. It does. That afternoon, Victor took Mateo to the beach. The boy watched planes trace white lines across the sky, his fingers moving as he mapped imaginary systems and pathways. Victor sat beside him, letting the day be quiet. For the first time in 3 years, the part of Victor that analyzed risk and consequence didn't feel at odds with the part that protected and nurtured. They weren't competing roles. They were the same instinct, expressed differently. That night, after Mateo slept, Victor sent one email. I'm open to a conversation. Conditions apply. He hit send and turned off his phone. Tomorrow could wait. For now, there was the sound of waves, the memory of applause that hadn't asked for anything in return, and the certainty that when power met patience, patience had won. And that was enough. I woke before sunrise, listening to the apartment breathe around us. Mateo slept curled on his side, one hand resting on the cockpit photo like a promise. I made coffee, stood on the balcony, and watched the ocean fade from ink to silver. Nothing felt urgent. That was new. For years, urgency had been my companion, tapping my shoulder, demanding action. Now there was room for stillness, and in that stillness I noticed how steady my hands felt, how quiet my thoughts had become, how the day seemed willing to meet us gently instead of testing us today at last. After breakfast, we walked the neighborhood, Mateo counting pelicans while I answered messages without committing to anything. One was from the airline, another from a regulator, both careful, respectful, precise. I replied with the same tone. Later, Elena's mother pressed a sweater into my hands, said the mornings were cooler than expected, and kissed my cheek. Family has a way of grounding ambition. It reminds you that decisions echo. On the beach, Mateo built runways in wet sand, naming winds, pointing out hazards, laughing when waves erased his work again and again until sunset, smiling proudly beside me, quietly content. That evening, I finally called back the number I'd been avoiding. We spoke plainly. They outlined a remote advisory role, limited hours, predictable weeks. I outlined boundaries, no travel, no emergencies that pulled me from home, no heroics. They agreed more easily than I expected. Expertise, it turns out, is rare enough to negotiate gently. When the call ended, I felt lighter, not triumphant. Choosing work that fits life isn't retreat, it's precision. Mateo asked if planes would still be safe. I told him yes because listening works for everyone, always, everywhere, including families like ours today, and tomorrow too. News travels strangely. By morning, a short article appeared online, factual, restrained, naming no villains. It praised a captain's judgment and a passenger's experience without spectacle. I closed the browser. Mateo didn't need headlines. He needed routine. We drove to the aquarium, practiced quiet voices, shared pretzels, watched rays glide like thoughts made visible. Later, a message arrived from the airline's training team asking permission to include our story in a module on accessibility. I said yes, provided Mateo remained unnamed. Respect begins with consent and care, patience, accountability, learning, humility, practice, repetition, listening, trust, dignity, safety, empathy, balance, growth. Diane emailed once more. It was brief. She wrote that her sister booked tickets for the fall, aisle seats, early boarding, headphones packed. She thanked me without asking for absolution. I wished them well and archived the message. Accountability doesn't require closeness. It requires change. At dinner, Elena's father asked if I missed my old title. I shook my head. Titles fade. Outcomes endure. Matteo announced he wanted to design planes that help people stay calm. I told him the world needs exactly that kind of engineer someday, everywhere, quietly, carefully, thoughtfully, patiently, bravely, kindly, responsibly, wisely, together, always, forward. On our last night, the sky cleared completely. We walked the pier, counted lights, named constellations we half remembered. Matteo asked if he could visit the cockpit again someday. I said maybe, and he accepted that answer, content with possibility. Back inside, I packed slowly, folding clothes with care. The FAA badge went back into my wallet beside Elena's photo, not as a relic, but as a tool waiting. Tools don't demand use. They wait for the right hand and the right moment when purpose aligns, quietly, naturally, without ego, fear, pressure, noise, hurry, doubt, regret, conflict, resistance, strain, ever. The morning we left, Matteo hugged his grandparents hard, promised to send drawings. At the airport, everything felt ordinary, and that felt like victory. No stairs, no lectures, just process and patience. Boarding was smooth, our seats were comfortable. I watched the wing as we climbed, listening out of habit, relaxed by choice. When turbulence bumped us lightly, Matteo squeezed my hand, then smiled. He trusted the systems. He trusted me. Trust, I realized, was the real outcome of the day everything went wrong together, without fear, judgment, shouting, force, status, threat, spectacle, cruelty, shortcuts, excuses, blame, anger, shame, noise. We landed quietly. The future didn't announce itself. It didn't need to. Later, at home, I pinned Matteo's runway drawing above his desk. He pointed to a small note he'd added. Listen first. I laughed and kissed his hair. Somewhere, emails would be read, policies adjusted, training rewritten. Somewhere, a lawyer would practice humility. A pilot would teach caution. A company would remember consent. In our house, the rule was simpler. Listen, protect, choose patience, then act. That was enough for today, tomorrow. Always quietly. Together, steadily, honestly, gently, bravely, wisely, kindly, patiently, fully, openly, humbly, safely, calmly, forward, home. Life did not change all at once. It changed the way water changes stone, quietly, persistently, without spectacle. The first week back home settled into routine, mornings with cereal and careful schedules. Afternoons with therapy appointments where Matteo practiced new signs and practiced asking for space instead of shrinking from it. Evenings with drawings spread across the table. Airplanes rendered with extra detail now, each labeled system colored carefully. He added notes in block letters he'd taught himself to write. Safe, listen, check twice. Victor returned to night maintenance shifts, but something in him had shifted. He no longer felt invisible in the work. He moved with intention, not resentment. When younger technicians asked questions, he answered patiently. When a supervisor rushed a checklist, Victor slowed it down. Not confrontational, just precise. Systems worked, better when people respected them. 3 weeks later, an email arrived confirming the advisory role. Limited hours, remote access, no travel. The language was careful, almost reverent. He signed the agreement without ceremony, then closed the laptop and helped Matteo with homework. Work was no longer an escape or a burden. It was simply another way to protect what mattered. At school, Matteo's teacher noticed changes. He raised his hand more often. He used his tablet to explain when noises overwhelmed him. One afternoon, a classmate reached out to grab his arm during recess, excited and careless. Matteo stepped back and signed, "Stop," before panic could take over. The teacher intervened. The moment passed. Progress didn't need applause. News of the incident on the flight faded the way news always does. No viral clips, no interviews, just quiet adjustments. The airline rolled out new training modules on neurodivergent passengers. Captain Vargas sent a postcard from Denver, a short note thanking them again. Diane's name surfaced once more in a trade brief announcing her withdrawal from a major case. No commentary followed. Accountability rarely makes headlines. On a Saturday morning, Victor took Matteo to a small air museum outside the city. They stood beneath retired fuselages and read placards together. Matteo signed questions about materials and failure points. Victor answered, Not as an inspector, not as a hero, but as a father who understood that curiosity was safer than fear. They sat on a bench under a wing. Matteo leaned against him and signed slowly, carefully, choosing each motion. When people don't listen, planes get hurt. When people listen, planes stay safe. Victor swallowed. That's right. And people too? Yes, Victor signed. People too. Months passed. Seasons turned. One evening, as rain traced lines down the window, Matteo taped a new drawing to his wall. A plane in midair. A small figure inside wearing headphones. Another figure beside him, steady and calm. Above them, written in uneven letters, were two words. We listened. Victor stood there longer than necessary, not because of sadness, because of completion. He thought back to the flight, to the moment when power had tried to shout its way through a problem it didn't understand, to the choice he'd made then and every day after, to stay calm, to stay present, to refuse humiliation as a language. The victory had never been public praise or professional validation. It had been dignity holding its ground. That night, as Matteo slept, Victor placed the FAA badge back in the drawer, not hidden, not displayed, available. He turned off the light and let the house settle around them. Somewhere else, another parent was being underestimated. Another child was being treated as an inconvenience. Another system was being rushed past safety in the name of efficiency or status or entitlement. Those stories were waiting, and so are we. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?